Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. In 2012, Henry Fisker had a vision. He was one of the most respected automotive designers alive, and his fingerprints were on the BMW Z8 and the Aston Martin DB9. He understood what cars could look like when someone cared enough to get it right. And so, in 2012, he finally decided to build one of his own. The Fisker Ocean was going to be different. A fully electric SUV that didn't look, well, like an appliance. It was to have sleek lines, a solar roof panel, and a starting price that positioned it squarely against Tesla. And by 2022, the Ocean had generated 31,000 reservations, representing nearly $1.7 billion in potential revenue. Industry analysts were paying attention, and investors, well, they were all in. And it looked from the outside like the beginning of something big. But it wasn't. Because Fisker Inc. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in June 2024. They had produced a mere 11,000 vehicles, and the company carried more than $1 billion in debt. And when the doors closed, every one of those 11,000 Ocean owners, people who had paid between $40,000 and $70,000 for their cars, found themselves with an electric car that was no longer supported. Now, to be clear, these weren't just orphaned customers. They were owners of vehicles that had been built to depend on Fisker's servers in order to function. That's right, everything from the brakes, airbags, battery management, door locks, and virtually every subsystem in the Ocean periodically needed to connect with Fisker's cloud infrastructure. And when the company died, those servers went dark, and the cars began losing the functionality that people had paid for. But here is where the story stops being about a car company. Within months of the bankruptcy, something formed that no one at Fisker had designed. No board had approved and no HR team had staffed. A group of Fisker companies from around the world created what was known as the Fisker Owners Association, or the FOA. The group grew to 4,000 members, and what those 4,000 people did next is what this episode is actually about. You see, the FOA reverse engineered Fisker's proprietary software. They mapped what is called the CAN bus networks that ran every subsystem in the car. They built open source tools on GitHub. Engineers who knew how to hack the system taught people who had never heard the term CAN bus before they bought an EV. In Europe, a group of technically skilled members who called themselves the Flying Doctors started traveling to other owners' locations to keep the cars running. I really want you to think about this for a moment. Nobody mandated this. Nobody put in a job description, and nobody issued a memo from the C-suite. The FOA and the Flying Doctors did it because they believed the thing was worth saving. And that distinction between compliance and belief is this entire episode. Now, let me tell you what collaboration without a mandate looks like, because most organizations, that at least that I know of, have never seen it. Every week, in firms and companies and law practices across the country, leaders are issuing some version of the same directive. And it sounds something like this: we're going to collaborate more. We're going to share information across teams. We're going to cross-sell. We're going to integrate practices. We are one firm, and we win together. It shows up in all hands meetings. It shows up in partner retreats. And it shows up on performance review criteria. It shows up on the value posters that you'll see in conference rooms and break rooms that nobody reads after the first week. And the problem? Well, it rarely works. Not at the level that it needs to. And you want to know why? Because mandate addresses behavior. And it never touches belief. The person who is hoarding their client relationships, protecting their research, keeping their presentation deck locked down are not failing to follow a policy, but rather they are operating from a perfectly rational belief that their individual value depends on what only they know. Their identity has a hard edge. It stops at the boundary of their own contribution, and anything beyond that edge, well, it feels like a threat. And if you remember in episode 64, I discussed the ego inversion that happens when my clients, my files, my research becomes a survival strategy. If you haven't heard that one, I encourage you to go back because it maps directly to what we're talking about right here. Now, the FOA engineers had none of that because there was no territory to protect. There was no client relationship to hoard and no promotion on the line for being the only one who understood the firmware. So the knowledge moved, and it moved freely, and it moved rapidly, and it moved across 4,000 people across the globe who had never met each other, organized in any formal hierarchy. And yet, there they were, working across time zones and languages towards a goal no executive had set for them. What made the FOA possible was belief. They believed the car was worth saving. They believed the community was worth building. And somewhere in that belief, individual self-interest stopped being the operating logic. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not suggesting that this was altruism, as that lets leaders off of the hook. What happened in the FOA is not evidence that people are selfless when they're sufficiently inspired. Rather, I position here that I believe what has really happened with the FOA is that it's evidence that belief expands the definition of self. When you believe in something deeply enough, the thing you believe in becomes part of who you are. And it logically follows that protecting that belief and yourself become the same calculation. Now, I've talked on this show about 3 moments that shaped how I think about this, and I'm going to name them briefly because they carry a piece of the argument I'm making here today. Now, again, in the last episode, episode 64, you know the shoeshine chair story. Co-founder of a company, not a junior employee, a co-founder got down and polished a sales rep's shoes because the rep thought he was too important to pick up office supplies. The co-founder's identity was fully embedded in the mission, that no task was beneath that. I've also talked about the service desk technician who worked for me and believed that every ticket he closed was one step closer to finding a cure for brain cancer because the research company work depended on the systems he helped keep running. He didn't have a corner office, but he had a belief that made the gap between his daily work and its ultimate purpose disappear. And then there's the raving fans standard that was embedded in me by another company that I worked for. That wasn't a service policy, but it was a conviction that ordinarily would be a choice. And everyone on the team, everyone in the whole company decided that they were going to adopt the raving fan standard. We all believed in the company's mission. We all strongly believed in the culture that we were building together, and we believed we were different. And together we would be the most successful company in our industry. And we all believed that it worked. The service desk tech wasn't collaborating because someone told him to. The co-founder wasn't polishing shoes because it was in his job description. And that raving fans culture didn't spread through a mandate. It spread because people believed in what they were part of. And that belief made the standard obvious. The FOA engineers who taught CAN bus hacking to strangers, they were in the same place. Their self-interest had expanded to include the community. Sharing what they knew wasn't a sacrifice. It was the most logical thing that they could do. And so here's the question that I'm posing to all of you. If the collaboration mandate stopped tomorrow, if no one was reviewing people's performance on collaboration, if the values poster fell off the wall, if the all-hands meeting ended and was never rescheduled, would the collaboration behavior continue at your company? If the answer is yes, you have belief. But if the answer is no, what you have is compliance. And compliance is so fragile in ways that belief is not. Fisker had 11,000 customers who believed in the product they had purchased. The company never built that belief deliberately. It arrived because of what the car represented, a different kind of future. And when the institution died, the belief did not. It had nowhere to go but into the people who held it. I do not believe that most leaders ever see this, because most leaders don't think about belief as something they're actively building or failing to build. They think about strategy, incentive structures, performance management, revenue. Ask yourself honestly, what do the people around you believe about the work that they are doing? Do they believe it matters beyond their own compensation? Do they believe the team's success is their success? Do they believe in a standard of service or output that they would hold themselves to even if no one was watching? If you don't know the answer, that tells you something. If you know the answer is no, that tells you something more important. I keep coming back to a question that sits at the center of the leadership book I am writing. How do you build belief that's contagious enough to survive the institution? The FOA proved it's possible. My VP of sales at a company that I once worked for, and whose story is the centerpiece of a chapter in the book, proved it on purpose. The belief he built in the people around him survived the organization that eventually removed him. It lives in the way those people lead today, including myself. That's what the book is built to answer. Not how do you build a great organization? How do you build belief that outlasts you? Those are very different questions. And the Fisker story, as strange as it is, points directly at the second one. So here's 5 key takeaways on creating a collaborative, belief-driven culture. The first one, collaboration doesn't happen because you tell people to collaborate. It just doesn't. I'm sorry, it doesn't. It happens when people believe the mission is worth more than their individual territory. The mandate is what you reach for when the belief isn't there. Number 2, belief expands the definition of self. When someone is genuinely invested in what they're building, sharing knowledge and capability isn't a sacrifice. It becomes the obvious move. The FOA engineers taught strangers to hack CAN buses because the community had become part of who they are. Number 3, the question to ask about your organization is not, are people collaborating? The question is, would they collaborate if no one was asking them to? Because the gap between those two answers, that's where your actual culture lives. Now, number 4, Fisker built a product that required the institution to survive in order for the customer to receive the value that they purchased. Most leaders build teams the same way. Everything routes through one person, one node, one relationship. When that node goes dark, the car won't start. But you know what? If you build belief that can run without you, then you're good. And finally, number 5, contagious belief is not accidental. It is the result of leaders who visibly model what it looks like to subordinate their individual identity to the mission, consistently, publicly, and at personal cost. The shoes get polished because the co-founder means it, not because the policy requires it. Now, if this episode resonated for you, and I hope that it did, I'd like to ask that you share it with one person who needs to hear it. Because the best conversations I have start with a foreword. And if you're not already listening and subscribing to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab, I'd like to ask you to take a moment and do that today. There's a link on the website, and paid subscribers are getting early access to chapter drafts from the book I'm writing. And remember, leadership, it isn't about perfection. It is about progress. So take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.